Hello, in this quick video, we take a look at a way to create UI definition.json file, which are often used for Azure Portal UI in managed applications and Azure Solution Templates, and how to use the ARM API control inside of that UI definition to query Azure PostgreSQL flexible server location-based capabilities. So this is just a good example of a relatively complex control that allows us to fill in drop-downs with special values. So let's first talk about why would we need this. So for example, when you deploy Postgres flexible server directly in Azure Portal as a standalone resource, it has a very nice UI that's built by the resource provider team that owns the flexible server resource provider. You can see them showing different dropdowns, such as if I pick a region, then I can pick Postgres version, and these values come from somewhere, and then I can pick in the right size of the server. And for example, if I pick a region that's not available for my subscription, let's say as West US2 in this case, it will tell me that, hey, you cannot deploy a Postgres server in your subscription in this region. And if I pick another region that has availability zones or not availability zones, it will be able to tell me, in West US, there's no availability zone. So all of this information uh, it knows to change this UI. But this UI is created by, again, the flexible server um, team. And if you wanted to use a flexible server inside of an Azure managed application or an Azure solution template as a third-party publisher and marketplace, you wouldn't be able to use this UI. Rather, you would need to use one of the UI controls or a combination of UI controls that are available for creating this create UI definition, right? So this video assumes that you're already familiar with what create UI definition is, and it's kind of a level 300 to 400 deep dive into how to use a relatively advanced control in there that's located right here called ArmApiControl in combination with some functions and in combination with the drop-down list, right? So basically, if I wanted to create that UI definition that could query the Postgres server location-based capabilities. So what are these location-based capabilities? So this link in the repo, that's a companion to this video, you can see that flexible server has a inside of the documentation, it has this location-based capabilities API. And this API for your specific subscription, or my subscription, for a given location, it can return back capabilities. And what it returns back is a JSON array of values that represent for each zone which flexible server editions are available, for example, burstable in this case, what are the supported versions, 12, 11, 10, etc., what is available for the other zone. So what we want to do is to try to simulate, not exactly like this very nice, strongly typed UI built by the resource provider team, but something similar that can give me a drop down of sizes and regions and can tell me if something is not available. So that way, if I'm including flexible server in my Azure managed app, I can have the customer who is deploying it, right, basically know about this before the deployment kicks off so that the deployment time there is no errors because a feature was selected that's not available. So in this repo, I put a simple example. Again, example is super simple, focusing on just this one capability, PostgreSQL flexible service selectors, and talks about how to test it out. And what we will see is the following approach. We will see it live. I created a little simple UI definition with a section, and then that section there is these drop downs, and these drop downs are getting filled in with the information based on my subscription, and they get processed in this way. So, and then I'm able to get these values into my template if needed. So let's take a look at the code. So the code in a createUI definition, again, assuming that you already know how createUI definition works, there will be the basics. I'm skipping everything in the basics. And there will be the steps. And in the steps, I created this Postgres flexible server settings. And I'm putting a control in there called Microsoft Solutions ARM API control. And this control is documented. And the documentation describes that it's basically able to make a ARM call. So it can only call ARM endpoints. It cannot call any REST endpoint out there, just ARM. You can tell it which method to use, what is the path for the call, and what are the properties that are passed to that call. And then it returns back a value, right? So as in this example, you can see provider's API is making a call, returns a value, and the value can then be parsed using various functions that exist in createUiDefinition, such as map, and we will see those functions in a second. So I have this control, that's the core control, and the control is calling the API we just looked at. It's passing the subscription ID, and it's passing the location, which we just picked on the basic step, the capabilities and API version. That's all it does, right? So this step will make a call to the API. Then I have an info box that will basically look at the value array that comes back from this call. And if it sees that the length of that array equals to 0, meaning that there are no um, values in this array, that means that this region and this subscription are not enabled. So what it will do is it will generate an error message, and it will say that this subscription is not allowed to provision in this location. So that's simple. But now we getting into a little bit more complex steps of actually putting a few drop downs, and we'll look at them first in the demo, and then we'll look at this code and understand. You can see there is a lot of parameters, a lot of parentheses here, so it's a little bit tricky to write. But we'll go through the main parts, and you can look at the code in the repo to kind of copy and paste and use an example like this to build your own. So let's go and do a test in the repo, right? So if I come back to here and I open up, this is the JSON file that we have right here. So I'll just copy the code, and then we will go to the createUiDefinition sandbox, which will open the portal. And in the portal, it will allow us to paste the JSON code and preview it, right? So that's a standard sandbox. So I'm pasting it here and saying preview. So what we see is that second tab, and here it tells me to pick a resource group. Well, I'll pick a resource group of some. We'll pick a region from a dropdown. That's again, those are default on the basic screen. And then we'll go to the Postgres flexible server settings. Okay. And what we'll see here are these dropdowns that we added in our createUiDefinition. First dropdown is availability zone. And you can see that it has values none, 1, 2, 3. These values came from a call to this API because for my subscription in region East US, I'm able to deploy into zone none, which means no availability zone, or specific zones. So let's take a look. So let's say I pick none, means regional. It says server edition. I can get burstable or general purpose for my subscription. We'll see it can also show memory optimized, but there is a reason it's filtered out. I did something special for that. So let's say burstable. It says, okay, based on these selections, these are the server versions that could be supported. Again, there may be version 11, I'm filtering it out. I'll show you how. So let's say I pick version 13. It says which VM size. Again, for burstable, these are the VM sizes. So I will pick one. Which storage edition, manage disk in this case, and what are the storage sizes that I can pick. Again, I don't need to make this a parameter because I can just specify the size, but this is just an example. And all these values, again, are coming back from this API call under each of these properties. So how does that all work? So if we return back to the code really quickly, I have a zones dropdown right here. The zones dropdown has this very complicated looking allowed values constraint. Again, how did I know to do this? Is in the documentation of our ArmApiControl, there is a simple example, but this example assumes there is just one simple return from the API, like names, etc. In our case, it's a little bit more complicated. And basically what it's doing is like this. We can look from inside out. I am taking the value of the response that came back from the ArmAPI control, and then I'm passing it to the filter function, And again, where are the filter functions? Filter functions are part of the collection of different functions that exist in createUiDefinition. So you can see filter function right here. It takes a lambda expression like that. So what it's doing, again, on a high level, is it's simply saying for each value inside of this array, um, do this little filtering. So this is on purpose. I added it here. It's basically, I'm saying that I want to check if the zone, which is the property inside of the API response. So again, basically looking at this value right here, the zone value, if this value is any one of these, none, 1, 2, or 3. So the reason I put it here is that in case you decide that you only want to support not zonal, you can basically, change these values or remove these values from this array and it will filter it out, right? But in my case, I kept them all there. So that's why the dropdown showed all the options. So that's filter number 1. And then right here, I'm mapping I'm going through the list that this filter returns, and then I'm creating the drop-down label with the zone and value with the zone. So let's see how that looks in the UI right here. You can see these are the labels and the values. So this is what I'm selecting. So that's the logic of that definition. Now, what if so that's easy. That's the top level selector. First select zone or none. Then the Flex Edition. Flex Edition is basically the property that is called supported flexible server editions right over here. And this is it's a child object that lives under the zone. You can see it right over here. So how do I create a dropdown that's right here? This dropdown controls what's available inside of this dropdown. So the trick is, again, going from the inside out, gets a little bit more tricky here, but basically, again, I'm going to the steps for the values array, and then I filter the value array where the zone equals what was selected in the zone selector right here. That's the zone selector. So that's step 1, is filter out based on what's selected right here. Then I map this out and I return back the supported flexible server additions property, which is a property. So I'm taking first to convert it into an array because it needs to be an array. So again, we're going to take a look at the API. You can see supported flexible server additions. It's an array, but I want just the first occurrence of this property that's sibling to this. That's why I need the first. Without that first function, it would not work. And then I filter out that array to only show the ones I want, the burstable general purpose, and you can see me kind of commenting out the memory optimized, and that is why we don't see memory optimized in this dropdown, but it would have appeared there if I did not filter it out on purpose, again, just to show in case you want to control what it is, and then again, fill up the dropdown with the name and the name. And what these properties are? These properties come from right over here, supportable flexible server edition, from the name, okay? And then what about the server version? So we selected the zone, the flexible server edition, and then the server version. So what is the server version? I on purpose only allow versions 12, 13, and 14. So what we do next is, again, we kind of go from the inside out. We filter out the zone that was selected above. Then we filter out, we get the supported flexible server editions like over there. Then we filter out to make sure that this same edition that was selected in this dropdown is the one that we are looking inside of. Then we're getting the supported server versions from there. So if we take a look here, supported server versions lives under this array. You can see in this array, this property supported server versions. We again convert it into an array with the first, and then we filter that array to only support versions 12, 13, 14. We can see I'm filtering out 11, and then we're filling these values down in the dropdown. So again, we can see those values appearing right over here, 12, 13, 14. And then what appears here is based on what I select here. So you can take a look and see that if I pick general purpose, different list appears. If I pick burstable, different list appears. How does that happen? Well, that happens because for the vCores, I have an even longer function right here. Again, from the inside out, it kind of goes the same way, selecting the zone that was selected, then selecting the flexible server edition that was selected, then selecting the server version that was selected. Then we get the supported vCores property, which lives right over here, right? And then we kind of generate a little bit more fancy output. We have a multi-line equals true, and that allows us to have a label, a description, and a value. So for the value and label, we just put O name, which is corresponding to this name. And then in the description, we put these little data points. Just again, as an example, right here, we show the cores, the IOPS, and the memory. And how it looks in the actual UI is if I pick general purpose, you can see this is the name, and this is the description, and it all came back from that API call. Okay, and basically this is the way that everything is done here. So it's kind of each dropdown depends on the previous dropdown and on the response of the API control. So using this pattern, you can probably simulate other similar requirements with some other APIs. Again, it all depends. It's not reusable directly because each API shape will dictate what is parsed out, but the pattern could be reused probably for many cases, but there may be some APIs that are very difficult to parse out the information and to fill in the dropdowns. So also while I was building this, what I noticed, it was very hard to keep track of all of these brackets, right? So right now I have it set to line wrap, so you can see everything in one line, but you can see how many parentheses there are. What I found that if you use Node++, it's a little bit easier to just get those highlighted, and it's probably possible in Visual Studio Code, I just didn't know how. So you can kind of keep track of your parentheses, because the parentheses is where I spend the most time trying to figure out what goes where. But basically with that, then these parameters get fed in as the outputs, and I can now select a version, go to the next step, and view the output payload of what I selected. I can pass these values then to my ARM template as inputs, and the deployment will likely work without problems because these were, again, based on the location-based capabilities for my specific subscription. And let's just see why this is so convenient is if I go back and I pick a different region where I, let's say, don't have anything available, I cannot deploy in my subscription, let's say in West US 2 flexible server, you can see that it will do a validation and will describe an error that's not allowed. This error, again, comes from this info box right over here that's counting the number of values returned. And then you can see that all of these are empty. And because they're all required, if I try to go and deploy something, I will not be able to because the validations cannot be configured. So I can go back here, select the proper region. Let's take another region. Let's say West US. West US region is available, but it is, as you can see, it only supports regional deployments, not zonal. So that way I don't see the 1, 2, 3. Again, I can pick the sizes. I can pick the right VMs and the right storage, and I'm able to see the outputs of the UI based on my selection. So let's just see how that looks. Great, and these are the selections that are possible. So again, the point of this example was just to share the fact that how to do this pattern, and the code will be in this repo that's a companion to this video, and you can take a look and try it for yourself and look at the actual code here and potentially build something much more special to your scenario with another resource that has similar kind of capabilities, API or other things. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.